Hey, nice shirt, Levi.
All right. Good evening. Let's get moving with class. I want to give you a heads up on a few different things that are happening before we get started. One is that this Sunday, I figured like this is a topic that might be interesting, that might interest y'all. Our sermon topic on Sunday. It is called, well, Jeremy has titled it "The Heart of Worship," I think, unless that's changed. Thank you, William. And Jeremy, give me a one sentence that's not a run-on sentence about what this sermon's about.
The sermon is about the importance of our relationship with God as the heart of our worship.
Okay, and then what's that evening going to be about?
The role of emotion in worship.
Okay, thank you. So, I think those are interesting topics, especially the Sunday evening topic, which is the role of emotion, right? Like he said, and so that's what we do on Sunday. Obviously, we'll be worshiping together, but those are the topics we'll be talking about in our lesson and that night in the lesson. So, let's see, Sunday night, we're planning to not have Dad because the lectureship starts. But I would be willing to do it if multiple of you were like, hey, we're not going to the lectureship, so we would rather do that. Then I'm game to do it. But as of now, we were going to give you the opportunity, if you wanted to go to the lectureship, to do that. We're still going to have our service together at 5. I don't think the lectureship starts till like 6 or a little after. And so if you want to go to that, then you'll have time. But if multiple of you would rather just have a devotional together, then we can do that. As of now, we're not going to do Dad, though. And I'll text you if that changes. Now, there's going to be no hub this Monday because of lectureships. And next Monday, because it's the week of Halloween, and the camps always host something for Halloween, and they don't want to host 2 things in the same week. Understandable. And if you don't understand, you'll understand one day. And so we'll cut them some slack for postponing our hubs here for a couple weeks, and then we'll get back to it. Guys have a devotional not this Friday, but next Friday. I think that's the 24th. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong there. But it's at the Jerkovskis. So I don't know if you know Brian and Deanna Jerkovsky yet, or maybe Garrett from school. But they're going to host a devotional for the guys, and that's going to be from 6 to 8. Not this Friday, but next Friday. It's about 30 minutes away. I think it's in Millbrook. And so if that's too far for some of y'all and y'all would rather take the bus, then I could probably take the little bus. But if y'all would rather just drive separate or whatever, just let me know. If any of you want to take the bus, then come let me know if you're planning to be there. So we'll eat dinner, and then Brian will lead us in a devotional that day. Let me know, though, if you are planning to come regardless. That way we can make sure that we have enough food either way. Let's see. Girls have a Girls' Evo coming up soon. They haven't nailed down a date yet, but they're going to let you know soon. And so be on the lookout on the Instagram because they will post it, I think, like a week out. But they're just trying to find a date that works for everybody, and it's hard with schedules and stuff. So, but just be on the lookout for that. Make sure that if you haven't already, you study Galatians, because next devotional, I think that's what y'all are going to talk about, and then prepare for the next one. So if you did go to that last time, I hope that it's been a good study for you to do on your own and kind of maybe guide you through what it's like to study, help push you a little bit into personal study, because I know that's their goal. Okay, that was a lot of announcements. Let's jump into it. We're going to be talking tonight about the lust of the eyes. Last week, Jake talked about lust of the flesh. Tonight, we're going to talk about lust of the eyes. And let's first, before we really dig into what that means and what it looks like, let's talk about the actual text itself and remind ourselves of what we're talking about overall, what John is talking about in the letter. Logan, can you read for me this passage on the screen, 1 John 2, 15 through 17?
Do not love the world nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. The world is passing away, and also its lust, but the one who does the will of God lives forever.
Okay, so what does it mean? And this is a fairly simple question, I think, but I just want to make sure that we all understand and flesh it out. What does it mean to love the world?
Prioritize it.
Okay, so you prioritize the world, and what are we referring to when we say the world?
earthly things.
Okay, earthly things, things that aren't heavenly, maybe. Probably a specific, not a specific, but maybe a nuance of things that are evil, things that are like worldly. We're to be looking upward to things that are heavenly or of the kingdom of heaven. So that's what it looks like to love the world. And it's not that you can't appreciate like the physical world that we live in or that God made. There's nothing inherently wrong with saying this world that God made is actually a nice world. That's not wrong. He created all things to be good, right? But it's wrong to love or prioritize things of the world because they're flawed by sin, not by God's design or creation. And so why would you love something that's flawed when we're pursuing heaven, right? It's perfect. That is the spiritual reality that we should be living. We live as people who have the reality of heaven that we get to strive for. This is our reality now, but in our minds, we're looking ahead. We have a reality that we're headed toward. And so we live in that way. We don't love the things that are here because this is temporary. And so loving something implies is sacrifice, and it implies devotion. Things or people that you love have a special place in your mind, right? You think about them in a special way. And you may think of them often because you care about them. You love them. And so John writes that it's possible to love the world and this sinful realm that we live in more than the heavenly realm that we are to be running toward. If you look at Hebrews 12, 1 through 3, it gives that idea. And so he says that if you love the world like this, then the Father can't abide in you. You kind of see that toward the end of verse 15, right? That the Father is not in the person who loves the world. You only get to serve one master. And I'm kind of just recapping some things that Jake said, and we'll get into it. But you can only serve one master. And so the question is, which one are you going to serve? It's the idea that like you can't side with every Democratic platform and also side with every Republican platform, right? Like you can't be an Auburn fan in every game and an Alabama fan in every game, for those of you who are like from Alabama. And you can't love the Father simultaneously loving something of the world. You can't give wholehearted devotion to both, especially things that are of the world that are diametrically opposed, completely opposite to the Father. They can't happen, okay? And so, what are these avenues of sin that show that you love the world more than God? Well, he says the lust of the flesh, what we talked about last week, and then lust of the eyes, and then next week we'll talk about the pride of life, or as this translation says, the boastful pride of life. And we talked about this, the word lust, it doesn't necessarily mean sexual desire, right? Though that can certainly be a sin that enters through this avenue. The sexual sin can, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But the word means like a craving or a desire, especially an inordinate one, a wrong one, right? And so lust of the flesh, we talked about, that's to live life dominated by sins. Like you're gluttonous with food, and you eat as much as you want all the time. Or you're selfish with possessions, or you're relaxing your morals when it benefits you. You constantly want immediate gratification from your desires. You want to satisfy your desires all the time, and you want it done now. And we looked at Galatians 5, 19 through 24, which are all sins that happen when you only feed your fleshly desires. It's all about gratifying your senses. So, what does it mean what does lust of the eyes mean? If you were to give it a definition, how would you define it? How would it be different than what we just talked about with lust of the flesh?
I think it's something like it hasn't been attained yet, if that makes sense. Like, I think on like the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus is talking about adultery, and he's like, well, if you look at a woman with lustful intent, you've already committed adultery. Kind of like that idea of what we're seeking. Like if I am, back in that scenario, if I'm seeking out a woman based off of lust, sexual lust rather than what we've been talking about, then that's not what I should be seeking. Also, I'm sorry.
No, okay, yeah. So You make a good point in that it's not necessarily the action itself of like doing it. It's a heart thing. You desire what you see so much so that it's covetous. It's covetousness is the lust of the eyes. I see it and I want it. And I want it so bad that it consumes me. You see something you want and it becomes an unhealthy desire because you want it so bad that it just eats at you. Day after day, hour after hour. And you can't be satisfied until you have it. You're left unsatisfied until you go get it. And it dominates your thoughts. It causes you to never be content. And you think, I want this so bad. Why can't I just have this? Like, how can I get this? And it dominates you. It's like a cancer. It spreads. It starts small and it just spreads everywhere until it consumes you completely. Until it reaches the point where all that you do is just an act so that you can have this thing that you want so badly. Your mind's always on it. Your actions are always to obtain it or to achieve it. Whatever you're lusting toward, whatever you crave and you desire, and you're never satisfied until that lust is quenched. So how does this idea of lust of the eyes, how does it relate to what we saw in verse 15? Loving the world.
I think it goes to what you were talking about, because last week when we talked about lust of the flesh, we talked about the physical nature, kind of what that's talking about, and I think lust of the eyes is more the mental that you're talking about, like you're constantly thinking about it, constantly desiring that. It's always got like the forefront of your mind, and if something like that has the forefront of your mind, then God doesn't, which means you're putting God second or even lower down than second, because
Like third.
yeah, like third, maybe even fifth, sixth. But anyway, so it just means God's not first because that's all you're thinking about, and if that's all you're thinking about, then you can't be thinking about God.
That's right. And this is a constant desire for something of the world that takes up all of your thought space. It's a desire that should be for God, that you have for something here. If your inner being longs for something that you don't have on this earth, and that's all you think about, how can you also say, but my heart belongs to God? You can't, because your heart doesn't belong to God. It belongs somewhere else, right? Your thoughts can't be dominated by something that you want here, but then also say that God brings you a peace and a contentment that the Christian is supposed to have. Yeah, Derek.
Kind of like the Ecclesiastes idea, where I saw it, I saw everything, I wanted everything, and I went and I got everything, but ultimately it wasn't worth it.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I looked, my eyes lusted for it, I indulged in it, so it became fleshly, but ultimately it was my eyes that made me do it, because I saw it, I wanted it, I desired it, and he identifies that some of those things are good. It's attractive. We don't want something that's not attractive.
Right.
If it felt like gouging our eyes out, we wouldn't look at it.
Right.
We wouldn't want it. We wouldn't desire it.
Yeah, and is it God's fault when you reach that point where you've done everything that you want, you've acted on every lust of the eyes, and you still feel empty and without peace and without contentment? Is it God's fault? Well, no. It's ours for allowing our devotion to God to waver and then have now an obsession with something else, with possessions or with relationships or with whatever you want to say that's of this world. And so even, and this is an important thing to bring up, I think, even possessions and things that aren't necessarily inherently bad, right? Like we're going to talk about some things that aren't inherently bad. But they can become bad when that is all we desire. And that it dominates us, that we don't have this thing that we really want. When it becomes an unhealthy desire. So it's when the desire becomes your master. You're not in control anymore. The lust of the eyes is. And this is when it becomes a problem. So, how does the Bible talk about the lust of the eyes? Well, let's talk about eyes first. What do eyes do for you? Well, they take in the surrounding world, right? Everything that's within your eyes' reach. And it allows your brain to process it. You see it, your brain processes, this is what I'm seeing. And as long as your eyes are open and you're seeing clearly, you're taking in information and stimulus and etc., whatever else. But what happens when your eyes lock in on something? You fixed your gaze on something. Well, your mind's told your eyes, hey, stay right there, because something looks good. And then where your eyes remain, there your body tends to go, right? You're running a race. You're not going to run your race looking to the right, right? Or the left. You're going to run your race facing the finish line. Why? Because you're moving forward toward the finish line. And when you look only to the right, what's most likely going to happen? So you're going to start veering to the light, coming out of your lane to the right. You're going to come out of your lane because our body tends to go where our gaze is fixed. So I'm going to have a few people read some different verses. Emma Cable, can you read Proverbs 17:24? Ken, this isn't going to be on screen. Can you read Job 31:1? Cole Armstrong, can you read Exodus 20, verse 17? And Ethan Thomas, can you read Romans 7, verses 7 through 8? And then we'll get more later. Okay, so if you're not reading, then just kind of, you can flip along or just listen to the person reading. If you're reading, make sure to read loud so people can hear you. All right, Dalton first. Proverbs 17, verse 24. What does the Bible say about lust of the eyes, about covetousness? I didn't say you. Who did I say Proverbs? Emma, my bad. I was thinking about you, like always.
The discerning sets his face towards wisdom, but the eyes of a fool are on the ends of the earth.
Okay, so the discerning sets his face toward what? Wisdom. But the fool sets his face toward things of the earth, toward the ends of the earth. What's the main idea of this proverb? Proverbs are just like quick sayings that we can get, and there's something in this here. What's the main idea?
Can you repeat it?
Emma, can you repeat it?
The discerning sets his face toward wisdom, but the eyes of a fool are on the ends of the earth.
That was Proverbs 17:24.
This sounds like the gist of it is the ones who want to figure out things, or the ones who are making the discernment, obviously the discerning, they want to set their eyes towards understanding, towards knowledge, while people who are, I always use big words, people who are like voracious, who want more, end up chasing nothing. They set their eyes on the ends of the earth, which is nothing. It goes to nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that kind of is the idea. It's not a super difficult thing to grasp. One who can determine right from wrong. They're discerning. They can see things and discern this is what's good and what's not. Well, they're thoughtful and they're looking forward. They're trying to become more wise and gain in wisdom. But the fool is constantly keeping their sights on worldly, worthless things. And that's kind of what we talked about, what Derek mentioned with Ecclesiastes, the same idea. And your sight is where your focus lies. And so what do you constantly find yourself looking toward or thinking about? Is it wise things or is it worldly things that's constantly on your mind that you're constantly moving toward? All right, Job 31:1.
I have made a covenant with my eyes. How then could I gaze at a virgin?
Okay, so this is Job, and he's making this like final plea or defense to God. And he's confused as to why he's getting punished, right? And so as evidence of his righteousness, he's trying to prove to God, I did no wrong here. He gives this evidence and says that he's made a covenant with his eyes, with himself, that he's not going to look at another woman. He's married. And so there's no one else that he is going to look at like this. And think about this. This is interesting, I think. This is before the time of like the Israelites getting the law, right? Job's really early. It's later in your Bible. It's really early on in time. And so they haven't gotten like the law yet, and yet Job still knows, I'm not going to look at another woman because I have set my mind, I've made a covenant with my eyes, a promise to my eyes. I'm setting it on where it needs to be, not on other things. And so he's saying that it would be wrong for him even to look at another woman. Well, what does Jake mentioned earlier, Matthew 5, verse 28? Jesus is correcting the idea. It's not just the act of committing adultery, it's the fact that you even desired it in the first place is the thing that's wrong. Job figured that out a long time ago, right? In Job 31. And so what does it look like in your life to make a covenant with your eyes? Well, it means you're deciding or you're committing to not set your gaze on anything else or to not set your gaze on something. You're limiting your vision so that the idea or the stimulus that keeps popping up in your head, that's what you're choosing to stay away from. And it's not going to be something that you allow to fill your brain. It's not going to be something that consumes you because you're not setting your gaze on it. You're keeping your eyes away from it, actually. So what does the Old Testament talk about when we talk about the lust of the eyes and covetousness? Let's read Exodus chapter 20, verse 17.
You shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor.
Thank you. You remember a kid saying, don't covet what is his. Exodus chapter 20, verse 17. This is part of the Ten Commandments. And it's, if you think about it, we don't talk about covetousness super often, I don't feel like. But out of the Ten Commandments that God gives his people and says, these are the covenant stipulations. I will be your God if you're my people. This is how you can be my people. One of them is, don't covet. And I think that's interesting. So why do you think that God included this law? Like, why would this be so crucial for the Israelites to abide by? What do you think?
Ultimately, it would be the covetousness that would lead them to the Canaanite gods. They wanted a king, they coveted a king, if you will, and that started what would end up splitting the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And that same covetousness would lead them to idolatry, would lead them to all kinds of other sins. It caused Solomon's downfall, because pretty much every big historical figure in the Bible, in the Old Testament, caused their downfall because they wanted what was not theirs.
Yeah, and so if they're gonna look outside of themselves, like we're talking about covetousness, not within but outside. Well, then the Israelites could look around and say, we're the only group of people that we're coming by that live this way and that serve this God and that do these things. And so let's just not. Let's actually just look like other people. And in fact, I want to look like other people so bad, let's just worship their gods. And let's take in their customs and do what they do. And have a king. And that is what God, one thing, I think, that God is warning of. Don't be covetous. And he says don't be covetous. He kind of hits at that idea earlier, right? Like, don't have any other gods before me. So there's got to be another reason, too, that he says don't be covetous. What would another reason be? Yeah.
It eliminates contentment.
It eliminates contentment?
If you covet.
Like discontent?
Yeah.
There we
That's
go.
kind of the word. It was like,
I see what you're saying.
if you do covet, it eliminates contentment.
Right. And so now we're kind of talking about more of like within Israel, within your own people, and this is kind of what he says in the commandment, right? Within your own people, how are you supposed to represent gods to the world if you're constantly wanting each other's stuff? How are you ever going to be content with what God gives you, with the manna that comes from heaven, and with the things that he has provided for you, if you're constantly wanting each other's stuff? You'll never be content, and you'll never actually want to be the people that God would have you be if you're always just wanting something else on this earth. God's saying, actually, instead of wanting another guy's wife or his cow or whatever, instead, look to me. Instead, be content with the blessings I gave you, because I brought you out of Egypt, and now you're here. So, I guess I want to read Romans 7, right, Ethan? Can you read Romans chapter 7, verse 7 and 8? And this isn't Old Testament, but we're going to get there. Romans 7, 7 and 8.
What then shall we say? That the law is sin? By no means. Yet if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. For I would not have known what is to covet, if the law had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. For apart from the law, sin lies dead.
Okay, so Paul in Romans here is trying to fulfill a different purpose than what we're about to bring out. But it's worth asking and bringing out. Paul's talking about the law, like the old law here. And he's talking about, whether or not it's sinful or not. He says, no, it's not sinful, and there's a reason for it. But in his example, he says, I would not have come to know sin except through the law, for I would not have known about coveting if the law had not said, you shall not covet. And then he goes on to talk about, I didn't covet because the law said not to, right? Why do you think that Paul only talked about not coveting? Of everything in the old law he could have talked about, he said, I would never have known not to covet, that was wrong, if the law didn't say not to covet. Why do you think he only mentioned coveting? You can spitball ideas here, that's okay.
I think it kind of goes back to what you talked about in Exodus, as in, like, it's not necessarily saying, like, a specific thing, but it's an overarching idea of get your eyes away from the world, because that's not where you're supposed to be looking for. Because like the Israelites are called to be set apart, and as Christians we're also called to be set apart. It's hard to be set apart if you're looking at and desiring the same things that everybody else is, desiring the lives of everybody around you, kind of like what Cole was talking about. But rather, if you're looking to God, like having like a tunnel vision type thing with God, not looking at anything on the sides, then it's going to be hard to fall into the crowd because you're different.
Yeah, you've set your eyes on different things. So many Jewish rabbis thought that you could kind of sum up the whole law with kind of the idea of just don't covet. And I would think the reason is, well, you don't covet other people's things. That's your relationship with other people. You don't covet the gods that other people are serving. You're not coveting other gods. And so in that way, you kind of summed up the whole law, your relationship with God and your relationship with people. And so you will constantly be relying on God, both as the God that you serve and as in the sense that you're not wanting other people's things and not content with what God's given you. And so I thought that was an interesting idea. And look, Paul's doing something a little bit different in Romans 7, but I think that there's somewhat of a point there of he only mentions coveting. Why? Well, maybe it's because that kind of sums up the whole main idea of the law, I think. So, how does the New Testament talk about coveting? Let's flip around for a few verses. Let's see. Abby, can you get Romans 1, 28 and 29? And then, Desi, can you get Colossians 3, 5, and 6? You go ahead and read that for me there.
And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers.
Yeah, the list continues on, but I was trying to just point out the fact that covetousness is there. So, in Romans 1 here, he's kind of listing like righteousness comes through God, but also God's wrath is going to be shown to the unrighteous. Let me describe these unrighteous people for you. And he goes on to talk about people who are unrighteous, and he's giving all these kind of like, they've done this, and they do this, and here's it. And so now we get this list in verses 28 and 29. It says, they don't see fit to acknowledge God any longer, so God gave them over to a depraved mind, or maybe your text says a debased mind, and the idea is worthless. You've got a mind that's just on worthless things. And so because your mind's on worthless things, and God gave you over to that mind because that's where you wanted to go anyways, and to do things that aren't proper, your mind's filled with unrighteousness, and what's included in the list of this people of this description? Covetousness. Something that we don't really talk about very often, but it's there, it's right there. And so the main idea here is that these people have rejected the truth of God. They're anti-God, and they're showing this desire for everything else. And they always want other people's stuff, and they're never content because their minds are worthless. They always have things on their mind that are worthless things. Okay, let's read Colossians 3, 5, and 6.
Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you, sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming.
So covetousness, again, is a part of a pretty serious list here. And so this time it says covetousness, which is idolatry. And some of yours might say like, what does it say here? Which amounts to idolatry. But the idea is really, it is idolatry. And so, what does that mean? Why would he say that covetousness is idolatry? Yeah, Derek.
Idolatry is taking something and putting it in a place of prominence, no matter what that thing is.
Mm-hmm.
So, taking what someone else has, what someone else has achieved, what someone else has earned, wanting that for yourself. Not conceptually, not like you see, hey, this person has a wife, I kind of like that too someday. That's not covetousness, that's hope. But looking at a guy who's got a wife and saying, I want his wife, you're orienting yourself in such a way that you want what he has more at his expense. You want what he has, and you're placing it above God.
Mm-hmm.
Idolatry is to place something that is not God above God. It's
Right.
your eyes upon. It's how your life is orienting.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much nailed it. Because you've replaced a desire that should be for God. You've replaced that desire where God should be with something else, with a desire for the world. Now it's become idolatry. And God is supposed to consume you and transform you and transform your mind, and yet you're clinging to a love of the world that is going to pass away. And let me just stop for a second and say, I say you or your a lot. I'm really saying us. Like, I'm not trying to exclude myself from this. I just typically say you and don't think about it. I feel like I should put that out there because I'm not excluded from these words. So, let's talk about this. What do we covet? What are things that our eyes lust after? We need to be probably a bit more practical with the rest of the time that we have. We've talked a lot about what covetousness is and how lust of the eyes happens and the effect of the eyes on the body and how we see it and how we want it. And we've talked about how the Bible views covetousness or lust of the eyes. But we haven't talked a lot about what it looks like for us in our daily lives very much. And the goal here, let's take a step back for a second, is how do we live lives that are raised? And right now, we're looking at what's going to stop us. What are things that are going to hinder us from living lives that are free from death and lives that are looking toward heaven? Well, one of the things is lust of the eyes. So, we need to be pretty practical. What does this look like in our daily lives? Well, let's hit the most obvious one first. Covetousness in the context of sexual immorality. And I think that this can kind of look a couple different ways. Obviously, Jesus talks about this in Matthew 5, verse 28. You're looking at someone who isn't yours with sexual desire. And sex is everywhere and is all around us. And I'm just going to be practical. On campus, I'll talk to guys in particular, though this applies to girls too. On campus, it's hard to be on campus for more than like an hour. I'm on campus like an hour a week maybe 2. And not see things that would draw your attention. It's difficult, right? It's easy to go on campus, and there are some people and some girls who just aren't wearing much clothing. And so it makes it hard to focus. It makes it hard to keep your eyes where they need to be. It's just difficult in your daily life. And it's everywhere. I'm not just saying on campus. It's literally anywhere you go and everything that you do. It's there. But I'm making this as an example. And so it's difficult to have a pure thought life, right? It's hard. And it's difficult, and I would say even annoying, to constantly have to be dodging, right? Constantly kind of left and right. Because some girls just don't wear much clothes. It's just the truth. And you really don't have to be looking forward to notice, dude. It's not like I'm sitting in the caf talking to students and I'm like, let me just look around. No, I'm just eating my grilled chicken. And then it just so I'm bouncing constantly, right? And I'm kind of making light of it, maybe because it's a little bit uncomfortable, but it's a real thing. Like it's annoying. And it's not just annoying, it's like harmful. that we're kind of constantly, not just guys, anybody, but from my perspective, guys, are constantly kind of dodging, moving our eyes from left to right. And why do we do that? Because we want to keep our thought life pure. We don't want images to stay in our head that we don't want there, but they can, especially if you dwell on it. Especially if you don't think, I need to look away, I need to change, I need to look down on my food, I need to stay focused on my friends. It can so easily just sit in your mind. And then what have you done? It's lust of the eyes. You're looking at something that's not yours, and you're thinking about, I want that thing. And it's a girl, right? I don't know. But in a guy's mind, I'm being candid here, in a guy's mind, it doesn't matter. I just want that. I want that girl. And that's not healthy, and it's not right. And look, can we just pause? We're smiling and kind of chuckling because it's uncomfortable. I'm trying to be like real about it, and so I'm even kind of like chuckling a couple times, but I really try to be real because it really is difficult. So your brain eliminates things that are going to allow sin through lust of the eyes to seep in. And you keep your vision on things that are above. This is the goal, right? And this applies to daily life. We talked about the whole calf scenario. But this is just daily life. It applies to your social media as you scroll through and something pops up inevitably, whether you follow it or not. And this is guys and girls, right? What do? Do you dwell on it or not? Or do you move away? Do get rid of it? Do you like report it as junk or whatever? How do you get rid of that? It applies to like porn, which for some might have been the first thing on your mind when I said lust of the eyes. I mean, for some of you might think that's ridiculous, but for some of you it might have been the first thing. All of this, like I said, it can apply to anyone in the room as well. And on it, we need to be thinking on the flip side of this. Okay, so I talked about a lot from the guy's perspective here, but I need to be thinking on the flip side, which may be predominantly for girls. How do I want people to see me? What do I want them to notice? Where do I want eyes to go? And this is really for both sides. Even if I don't want eyes to go there, even if I'm not wearing clothes to be like, hey everybody, look at me and look at these particular places, am I really making it easily visible? Am I making it easy for someone to struggle with this with me? And this applies, it could probably apply more to girls than guys because of the nature of both, right? But it can apply to both. And it's a temptation and a thought that both can have. And so we are called, whole room, guys and girls, to make a covenant with our eyes, to not look at someone that's not yours in that way, and to not allow yourself to become an easy target to be looked at that way. And so both are wrong. And let me make a note. If you need help with this, especially with porn, because I brought that up, if this is something that you struggle with and you need help with, then come talk to us. You can talk to counselors at Faulkner. You can come talk to me or our deacons, Jeremy and David. You can talk to our elders. There's so many people here who are willing to help you no matter who you are. This is an uncomfortable topic. We don't talk about it very often, but it is one of the most lethal silent killers in the room. And so if you need help with it, come talk to us. And also, don't be so prideful to think you're going to break it on your own either, because it won't happen. So, okay, next one. Materialism. Lust of the eyes, obviously, can show up in materialism. Maybe this is the first place your mind went. This is a desire or an obsession with anything of this world regarding materials. It's your future, your car, your clothes, your shoes, anything that controls you or drives you regarding materials can fall into this category. Do you have to have new shoes or new clothes to feel good about yourself? Or are you greedy with your money? Are you unwilling to give back to God or assist others who are in need because you need it? And some of that is a genuine need, but some of it is I'm just greedy with money, and I'm not going to give back to God, and I'm not going to help others. Have you forgotten that all these things are God's anyways, and it's not for your glory? The last one is relationships, and this is a tough one. For many people, relationships can be something that really dominates our thoughts. And it can become an unhealthy desire or lust. And so this can show up in numerous ways. And the first one, I think, is in familial relationships. You might have a family relationship that's really difficult, all right? In multiple different ways. And maybe it's a tough relationship with your mom or your dad, your siblings, or whoever. And I'm sure that this applies to several in the room. And when you see others have great family relationships, isn't it so easy just to say, man, I wish that was me? And beyond just, man, I wish this was me. Beyond that, to where it's almost like, why don't I have that? Man, why didn't I get to have this? And then it becomes an obsession. It becomes something that causes you to be discontent. You're constantly looking toward that, I want that, I want that, I want that. And it can really kind of dominate your thoughts. Why don't I have a family like this? And then it can also be in relationships, how we would typically use the word. And so this is kind of what Derek was talking about, and I'm going to give a way that this idea would be unhealthy. You're feeling lonely because you're single. It can be really hard, right? And it can cause the lust of the eyes to happen so much more easily, I think. And it's easy to see a happy couple, right? Probably daily, and think man, I wish I had that. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with, like Derek said, that's just hope. Man, I hope I find someone someday that'll be great. But where it becomes wrong is when it becomes an obsession, an unhealthy thing, where it ruins your whole day, every week, to think, I just don't have anybody. And when it becomes discontentment, where you're constantly looking at other people and thinking, I want that, to the point where you can't even enjoy life, because that's all you think about. All you want is something that you don't have, and it ruins your contentment. And before long, all you think about is how all these good things in your life aren't really that good, because you don't have someone. Now, all the good things in your life are just maybe, just not as great as they really could be. They're not good, because someone of the opposite sex doesn't give you the attention that you really want. And it's easy for that to cloud all of the great things God's done for you. And so being single is not like a curse. It can seem that way sometimes, but it's not. And it's dangerous when contentment is only found in a boyfriend or a girlfriend, rather than in your relationship with God. Because what that causes is, when you are single, you're discontent with everything. With every meal that you eat, with every time you lay your head at night, with every class that you're in, and every friendship that you have, you're always discontent. And some of you may struggle with this. I've in the past as well. Because you think, why don't I have someone? And why do all my friends get to be happy? And really, it's not all your friends, but it's going to seem like it. Why do all my friends get to be happy with this relationship that I don't have? I want that. And it just ruins your whole day. That is where it gets unhealthy. It's beyond a hope now. It's an unhealthy obsession with something I don't have. And so let's very quickly talk about this. How do we defend ourselves from this sin? In Matthew chapter 4, verses 8 through 10, well, here we go. Matthew chapter 4, verses 8 through 10, speed time. He's being tempted. Jesus is he's looking over at all of these kingdoms that the devil's tempting him with, and this is what he says. All these things I will give to you if you just fall down and worship me. And what does Jesus say? He says to him, go, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. This comes from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 10 through 15, and he quotes this verse because of this. Covetousness does not allow you to serve God wholeheartedly. You want the things around you, it distracts you from the only thing that you actually want. He quotes this verse because the Israelites are being warned before they cross over to the Jordan in the land of the promised land, before they come across. Moses says, hey, look, only worship God, nobody else. And if you do, this is going to be what happens. But if you're covetous, if you're looking at all these other things that you want, that you would rather have, you're not worshiping God. You've lost track. And what do? They get into Canaan. They start worshiping other gods, and they start coveting. We want a king. We want this lifestyle. We want these customs. And before long, they're not God's people anymore. And so how do we protect ourselves from lust of the eyes? Okay, very quickly. 1, from sexual immorality. Have accountability partners. Don't surround yourself with sexually immoral people, both in how they think and how they talk and in how they dress. And then cleanse your thought patterns. Work really hard to think better. How do you protect yourself from materialism? Have accountability partners. You're going to see a theme. Limit your bank account if you need to. Give more to God and become more reliant upon Him than you are of yourself. From relationships, fill your life with God. Wake up in the morning, listen to the Psalms on your phone. Pray on your way to class, pray on your way out of class. When you go home for your nap, read a chapter of the Bible. Before you go to sleep, read a chapter of the Bible. And I'm not saying that God is going to fill the gap necessarily that you want there, but He will hopefully make you more content. He certainly will. You'll be a lot more content with your life when you are closer to God and not so obsessed on something that you don't have. Final word. Sorry for taking so long. Rip. Anyways, Jesus calls our gaze to be on Him. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. We've got to lay aside every encumbrance and everything that ensnares us and set your eyes on Jesus alone. Okay, sorry for running you over. You're good to go. Hey, thanks, man.
I wish my
I just change colors here and there, and you know. Yeah, it's a simple formula. I mean, sure. It's just one side. Sure. Hey, I feel like it's really nice to meet you. Always do.
And it kind of sucks because you talked a lot about sex. Did you get it there? And my life. That's important. You speak for $90, I kind of miss. I didn't. You were just I wanted to.
Yeah, but I think.
My mom rapped. That's literally a
That's not what I thought.
I actually only said that because I asked someone else and they said, I thought we're going to drop it almost.
Good thing.
thought about that. I kind of thought that was covetousness is like getting something that you don't really realize to eyes. And so I kind of was trying to focus on this is like don't and like you can still be materialistic and have a lot of things and still be materialistic. But I was trying to think about the audience. You don't have a bunch of riches and all that kind of stuff, you know? If I was talking a bunch of rich people, it would have been different.
Yeah, that's what I was, because I was just immediately thought like Jordan and stuff like that. And that's like working, not even like coveting, like feeling.
And he brought out
Jake,
like so many people.
He doesn't really use that.
No,
I'll send it to him. I'll send it to him. Sorry.
Are you asking him what that is?
Okay.
That video you sent,
when you desire
Yeah, the,
how much
I saw a purple one in there.
you put
that's the one,
on
that's the one that
each
AK wants to. She's
Or
never gonna get it out
say,
yet.
I have to get it. This is my first
I'm
concert.
not, I'm not done yet, say, go and try to put like pressure swap. And like you see like, that's what I mean.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And then also Oldie got booed with the relationship. I was like,
Now, reunion tour. No, Katie, I really laughed because when we were in there, when I first found out, I looked at AK. I was like, I'm upset.
did you send it to